What if Silicon Valley rebelled against the US government? What if the world's most powerful tech companies decided they'd had enough? What if Apple, Google, Meta, and Microsoft turned their immense resources against the very government that helped them rise? Would it spark a digital civil war or a new era of freedom? This isn't just sci-fi, it's a scenario we could be closer to than you think. Let's dive in. Picture this: a world where Silicon Valley, the heart of American innovation, no longer marches in step with Washington, D.C. Instead, it stands in defiance. But how could we ever get there? Well, the cracks in this relationship have been forming for decades. The story of big tech and the U.S. government is not one of unconditional partnership, but of mutual dependence laced with suspicion, conflicting goals, and simmering resentment. Let's start with data privacy, perhaps the most visible battleground. In the 2010s, major tech companies began taking a strong stance on protecting user privacy. Apple famously refused FBI requests to unlock encrypted iPhones, citing user privacy and security concerns. Google and Meta, meanwhile, found themselves under fire for collecting vast amounts of personal data, facing growing demands from the government to open their black boxes and explain what they do with it all. Lawmakers demanded accountability, but tech leaders countered that government surveillance programs, such as the infamous PRISM, revealed by Edward Snowden in 2013, showed that the government itself couldn't be trusted with people's private information. This mutual distrust only deepened when federal agencies sought backdoors into encrypted communication tools, raising the specter of mass surveillance once again. Then there's the legal front, where the battle lines have been drawn over antitrust lawsuits. Google, Meta, Amazon, and Apple have all faced accusations of monopolistic practices. The government argues that these companies control markets unfairly, crushing competition and endangering the free market. But from Silicon Valley's perspective, these lawsuits feel less like fair regulation and more like political revenge. Punishment for companies that have grown so powerful they rival the influence of entire nations. Add to this the ongoing debate over Section 230, the controversial law that shields online platforms from liability for user-generated content. Politicians on both the left and right accuse big tech of abusing this protection, whether by allowing harmful speech to spread unchecked or by silencing political viewpoints. Silicon Valley, in turn, argues that government interference threatens the very freedom of the internet itself. Beneath these policy disputes lies a deeper ideological conflict. Silicon Valley was built on a fierce libertarian streak, one that champions innovation, deregulation, and the power of private enterprise to change the world. In contrast, Washington's growing desire to regulate, oversee, and tax. Big tech represents a classic clash between free market innovation and government oversight. For tech leaders, government red tape is an anchor slowing down human progress. For lawmakers, tech monopolies are runaway trains threatening democratic values and social stability. But perhaps no single issue has soured relations more than surveillance. Programs like PRISM and ongoing NSA monitoring made clear to tech giants that the government would weaponize technology against its own people when convenient. After the Snowden leaks, companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft ramped up their encryption efforts, not just to protect their customers, but to protect themselves from becoming tools of state surveillance. This wasn't a simple difference of opinion. It was an existential crisis for companies built on the trust of billions of users. And let's not forget the money. Silicon Valley has used offshore tax havens to protect billions in profits, exploiting global financial loopholes to avoid what they view as unfair taxation. In response, the U.S. government has pushed for greater financial transparency and tried to claw back revenue. The tension over taxation is more than an accounting issue. It's a battle over who has the right to claim the fruits of Silicon Valley's global success. Finally, there's the matter of geopolitics. In fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and social media influence, Silicon Valley wields power that rivals or even exceeds that of the U.S. government. Tech companies dictate how information flows around the world, influence elections, and shape public discourse, not just in America, but across the globe. The US government may have military power, but Silicon Valley has control of the digital battlefield. And sometimes, their global priorities don't align with America's national interests. For instance, while Washington seeks to contain China, many tech firms continue to pursue business in Chinese markets, walking a tightrope between profit and patriotism. All these tensions, the privacy disputes, the lawsuits, the ideological divides, the surveillance mistrust, the financial battles, and the geopolitical complexities, paint a picture of a relationship stretched to its breaking point. So we have to ask, what happens when the world's most powerful tech companies, tired of government interference, decide they've had enough? Could Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Meta take their immense resources and say to Washington, "No more"? Would they wage a corporate rebellion not with guns, but with algorithms, encryption, and infrastructure lockouts? And if they did, who would stop them? If Silicon Valley were to rebel against the US government, it wouldn't need tanks, missiles, or boots on the ground. Instead, its arsenal would be digital, and perhaps even more powerful. Big tech holds the keys to the kingdom in today's connected world. These companies control the flow of information, the infrastructure of the internet, and, in many ways, the inner workings of the modern economy. So, if they chose to fight back, what weapons would they wield? First, let's talk about data. Companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft process billions of data points every second. They know where we shop, what we watch, how we communicate, and even what we think about buying next. This isn't just marketing gold, it's strategic power. In a rebellion scenario, tech companies could deny the government access to critical data streams, blinding intelligence agencies, and law enforcement. Imagine the FBI losing access to cloud-based forensic tools, or the NSA being locked out of commercial data analytics platforms they quietly rely on. But data is only the beginning. Silicon Valley also runs the cloud. Amazon Web Services, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud together host much of the digital infrastructure the federal government and the military depends on. From secure communications to battlefield logistics to healthcare databases, these cloud platforms are mission-critical. What if AWS or Azure decided to suspend government accounts, citing terms of service violations or ethical concerns? Entire agencies could go dark overnight, grinding government functions to a halt. Then there's the power of encryption. Tech companies already make it difficult for governments to access encrypted communications, and in a rebellion, they could take that to the next level. They could roll out unbreakable end-to-end encryption across all their platforms, email, messaging, video calls, and deny government requests for backdoors. Law enforcement could find itself unable to monitor suspects or even coordinate its own operations if internal communications rely on big tech tools that suddenly become inaccessible. Perhaps the most frightening tool in Silicon Valley's arsenal is social media influence. Meta, Google, via YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok shape public perception in real time. In a rebellion, these platforms could control the narrative, flood timelines with anti-government sentiment, and suppress official government communications. They could amplify protests, organize strikes, and globally shame US leaders in ways that would be impossible to contain. In effect, tech companies could wage an information war, with the American people caught in the middle. And let's not forget financial leverage. Tech giants like Apple and Google control payment processors such as Apple Pay and Google Pay, while Amazon manages billions in e-commerce transactions. What happens if these companies refuse to process payments for government services? Imagine citizens unable to renew licenses, pay taxes, or access federal aid because the tech infrastructure that handles those transactions has been cut off. Even payment companies like Stripe, Square, or PayPal, closely linked to Silicon Valley culture, could join in, strangling the government's ability to move money. But what about defense? If the government tried to retaliate with cyber attacks of its own, Silicon Valley wouldn't be defenseless. These companies already have some of the world's most sophisticated AI-driven cybersecurity systems. They routinely fend off state-sponsored attacks from Russia, China, and North Korea. In a domestic conflict, they could turn these same defenses against U.S. cyber operations, using machine learning to detect and block government intrusion attempts in real time. They could also unleash offensive cyber tools, exploits that can shut down government servers, reroute internet traffic, or crash critical networks. This raises a critical ethical question. Would such actions be considered economic terrorism, deliberately sabotaging the nation's infrastructure for corporate gain? Or would they be acts of corporate self-defense, protecting their platforms and their users from what they perceive as government overreach? The answer depends on perspective. From the government's side, this would be nothing short of treason, a handful of unelected CEOs and engineers holding the nation hostage to protect their profits and ideologies. But from Silicon Valley's point of view, it could be a last stand for individual freedom and digital privacy in the face of authoritarian overreach. And this conflict wouldn't stay within the borders of the United States. Silicon Valley's services are global. If American tech firms decided to stop cooperating with the U.S. government, would they find themselves aligning with foreign nations who oppose U.S. influence? Would companies like Google and Microsoft turn to Europe for support, or even China, creating new global alliances in the digital sphere? Would tech workers, many of whom lean libertarian or progressive, side with their employers or resign in protest? The battle lines in this hypothetical war aren't just between Silicon Valley and Washington. They're between two competing visions of the future, one where government safeguards society, and another where private enterprise liberates it. But which is truly safer for democracy, and which is more dangerous? As we move forward, the stakes only grow higher. Silicon Valley isn't just a collection of companies, it's a digital empire with a population larger than the United States itself. If this empire turned its tools against its own government, the fallout could be unprecedented in human history. So the question remains, how far would they go? And what would the government do to stop them? If Silicon Valley decided to rebel, the U.S. government wouldn't simply stand by and watch its authority crumble beneath a wave of algorithms and server farms. The federal response would be swift, powerful, and layered, combining legal, cyber, and possibly even military tactics. But in a world where code is more powerful than bullets, how do you fight a war against the very systems your society relies on? First, Washington would unleash its most immediate weapon, the law. Expect a barrage of antitrust lawsuits aimed not at regulating big tech, but at breaking it apart entirely. The Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission could move to dismantle Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, and Microsoft, arguing that their monopolistic power now poses a threat to national security. But lawsuits take time, and a rebellion wouldn't wait for courts to deliberate. In an emergency, the government could seize corporate assets, freeze bank accounts, and revoke critical licenses with lightning speed. Executive orders could be issued overnight to cripple the financial foundations of the tech empire. And don't rule out criminal charges. Top executives could be indicted for sedition, conspiracy against the United States, or economic sabotage. But even as the courts move, the war would rage in cyberspace. Agencies like the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command wouldn't hesitate to strike back digitally. They could deploy offensive cyber weapons to cripple Silicon Valley's core infrastructure, crashing cloud servers, scrambling databases, hijacking communications networks. Government hackers might infiltrate AI systems to corrupt machine learning models, weaponize malware against internal tech systems, or shut down payment processors. The very tools tech companies use to run the modern world could be turned against them. Critical internet infrastructure like DNS servers and fiber optic exchanges, many of which are regulated or influenced by federal agencies, could be cut off or rerouted, isolating rebellious companies from their users. And if those digital counterattacks weren't enough, the government has an even more drastic option: boots on the ground. In the eyes of the law, an organized tech rebellion could easily be classified as an act of insurrection or treason. Under the Insurrection Act, the president has the authority to deploy federal troops to suppress domestic uprisings. National Guard units could storm Silicon Valley's data centers, corporate headquarters, and logistics hubs. The sight of armed soldiers securing Apple Park or Amazon's HQ might sound dystopian, but it wouldn't be unprecedented. Throughout history, federal troops have been used to break strikes, desegregate schools, and maintain control during periods of civil unrest. If tech companies were seen as endangering the nation's stability, the government could justify extreme force in the name of national security. But here's where things get complicated. Does a private company have the constitutional right to resist government orders? The First and Fourth Amendments protect speech and privacy, but they were written long before the digital age. Would encrypting data against government demands be an act of civil disobedience, or a criminal refusal to comply with lawful orders? The Constitution is silent on what happens when corporations, not states or militias, resist federal authority. The legal battleground would be murky, with tech lawyers arguing for corporate rights and federal prosecutors framing rebellion as economic terrorism. To understand what this conflict could look like, we only need to look back at America's past. In the late 19th century, railroad barons like Vanderbilt and industrialists like Rockefeller wielded economic power that rivaled the government. When they threatened the public good, the federal government broke up monopolies and seized assets. In the early 20th century, defense contractors and oil monopolies also clashed with Washington over who truly controlled the nation's destiny. Each time, the government ultimately prevailed, but not without a fight. Yet today's tech companies are far more global, decentralized, and embedded in daily life than any railroad or oil company ever was. And this conflict wouldn't unfold in a vacuum. America's rivals, China, Russia, Iran, would smell blood in the water. A fractured relationship between Silicon Valley and Washington would be a geopolitical gift to foreign adversaries. China could seize the moment to dominate the AI and chip-making industries, while America fights itself. Russia could launch disinformation campaigns to deepen public distrust. Even Europe might use the chaos to advance its own vision of tech regulation and digital sovereignty. In an instant, America's internal tech war could become a global power vacuum. At home, the American people would be caught in the crossfire. Imagine waking up one day to find your cloud storage gone, your social media offline, your paycheck delayed because a payment processor refused to cooperate with the Treasury. Essential services could grind to a halt. Hospitals, banks, airlines, all dependent on Silicon Valley's tech, would be collateral damage in a war most citizens never asked for. So what's the end game? Would the government try to nationalize big tech, taking control of platforms like AWS, Google Cloud, and Facebook under emergency powers? Would they create state-run alternatives overnight, like digital public utilities? Or would they strike a deal offering tech companies limited autonomy in exchange for restoring order? In the end, the question isn't just how the government would respond, but whether American democracy, as we know it, could survive a battle between its political and technological power centers. A government created by the people, for the people, may one day find itself at war with the digital empires those very people built. And if that day comes, whose side will history say was right? In a conflict between Silicon Valley and the US government, the most unpredictable factor wouldn't be algorithms or military strategies. It would be the American people themselves. Would they stand with the government that claims to protect democracy, or with the tech titans who promise freedom from state control? Or would they fracture into countless camps, each pulling the nation further apart? For many Americans, especially those who see themselves as tech-savvy, privacy-conscious, and innovation-driven, the choice might seem clear. Silicon Valley built the digital world we live in. It gave us tools to connect, create, and challenge the status quo. To them, big tech isn't just a corporate behemoth. It's a symbol of what America is supposed to be: bold, futuristic, and free from unnecessary government interference. These are the people who cheer for encryption over surveillance, who believe in decentralized finance, and who see AI as humanity's next great leap, not something to be shackled by Washington bureaucracy. For these tech lovers, a rebellion against the government might not be an attack on the nation. It might feel like its liberation. But on the other side stand those who fear what happens when corporations go unchecked. For government loyalists, the rebellion would look like chaos. Imagine essential services going offline overnight, banking apps freezing, airports shutting down, hospitals losing cloud access to patient records. In their eyes, Silicon Valley wouldn't be liberators. They'd be rogue actors endangering national security, economic stability, and the rule of law. They'd argue that only the government, with its checks and balances, can safeguard the public interest when private companies put profits and ideology ahead of the nation's well-being. And then there's the media, America's traditional battleground of narratives. Would they side with the rebels or the state? Corporate-owned outlets, some of which have financial ties to Silicon Valley, might downplay the rebellion's dangers and frame it as a fight for innovation and freedom. Others, perhaps backed by political or defense interests, would likely warn of the catastrophic risks of letting tech companies hold the nation hostage. Independent and partisan media would fracture along familiar lines, some praising the rebellion as a libertarian uprising, others denouncing it as Silicon Valley elitists attacking the working class. In this media war, truth itself could become the first casualty. The political map could fracture just as violently. States like California, whose economy and culture are deeply intertwined with Silicon Valley, might back the tech sector's cause. Imagine governors' mansions and city halls refusing to comply with federal orders to seize tech property or arrest company leaders. California, the world's fifth largest economy, could find itself at odds with Washington, not unlike how southern states once defied federal power. Other states, particularly those in the South and Midwest, might align firmly with the federal government, seeing the rebellion as the dangerous overreach of liberal coastal elites. The economic fallout would be swift and brutal. Tech stocks would crater, wiping out trillions in market value overnight. Retirement accounts, 401ks, and investment portfolios would feel the shockwaves across America. Thousands of workers in Silicon Valley and tech hubs like Seattle, Austin, and New York could lose their jobs as companies scramble to survive the government's crackdown. Essential services would be disrupted. Food delivery apps, GPS systems, cloud-based healthcare platforms, and logistics networks all depend on Silicon Valley's infrastructure. For millions of Americans, life would suddenly get harder in ways they never imagined. And beneath all of this turmoil lurks a deeper cultural divide. For decades, America has been drifting apart between tech progressive futurists and traditionalist conservatives. The progressives envision a world driven by innovation, global connectivity, and individual autonomy in the digital realm. The traditionalists, meanwhile, value national unity, moral order, and the idea that some institutions, government, family, church, must check the power of profit-driven corporations. A rebellion by Silicon Valley could deepen this divide into a full-fledged cultural civil war. On one side, tech progressives championing a future where artificial intelligence, blockchain, and global digital citizenship replace outdated national identities. On the other, traditionalists warning against the dangers of moral relativism, economic disruption, and the erosion of democratic accountability. This wouldn't just be a political fight. It would touch every aspect of American life: how we work, how we communicate, how we define freedom itself. And there might not be a middle ground. In such a polarized environment, calls for moderation could be drowned out by extremists on both sides pushing for total victory. Could this rebellion inspire copycat movements in other industries, finance, energy, or healthcare? Could the fight spread beyond America's borders as international companies and governments pick sides in a new global tech war? Would alliances form between Silicon Valley and international privacy advocates, or even authoritarian states looking to exploit the chaos? And what about ordinary citizens? Would they rise up in protest, taking to the streets in support of their chosen side? Or would they retreat into digital echo chambers, waging war through memes, cyber attacks, and boycotts? In the age of the internet, rebellions don't require physical armies. They require influence, and Silicon Valley has plenty of that. America has faced deep divisions before, during the Civil War, the Great Depression, and the Civil Rights Movement. But never before has the battlefield been so virtual and the players so deeply embedded in every part of daily life. This wouldn't just be a war for territory or laws. It would be a battle over the soul of modern society. So, if the lines were drawn tomorrow, whose side would you take? If Silicon Valley were to rebel against the US government, what would come next? Would America adapt and survive? Or would the conflict unravel the very foundations of the modern world? In this final chapter, we explore 3 possible futures, each one a reflection of our choices, our fears, and our hopes. Scenario 1. Collapse. The American experiment breaks down. In the darkest timeline, the rebellion doesn't end with a victor, but with mutual destruction. The tech giants and the federal government lock themselves in an endless battle, each side crippling the other until there's nothing left to win. In this scenario, trust in both institutions collapses. American citizens, caught in the crossfire, lose faith in Silicon Valley's promises of innovation and the government's promise of protection. The economy crashes as tech stocks plummet, sending shockwaves through Wall Street and wiping out retirement savings, investments, and corporate wealth. Startups flee Silicon Valley, foreign investors pull out, and global markets recoil in fear. Essential services falter. Hospitals can't access cloud-based medical records. Airlines grounded by malfunctioning logistics systems. Banks paralyzed by payment processor shutdowns. Everyday life, once powered invisibly by the seamless cooperation between tech and government, becomes chaotic and unpredictable. And while America fights itself, rivals like China and the European Union seize the opportunity. China could step into the void, offering its authoritarian but stable tech model to the world, spreading its surveillance technologies and digital currency dominance. The EU, long frustrated by American tech monopolies, could present its own vision of a regulated, privacy-centric digital future. In either case, the US loses its grip as the global leader in innovation. America wouldn't fall overnight, but it could lose something just as important: its belief in itself as the engine of the future. Scenario 2. Revolution. Silicon Valley builds a new digital nation. But what if Silicon Valley wins? In this radical future, the rebellion overthrows federal control in the digital realm, creating a tech-driven autonomous zone, or perhaps an entirely new digital nation-state. Imagine a world where Silicon Valley no longer answers to Washington, but instead governs itself according to its own rules. AI ethics boards replace congressional committees. Blockchain-based voting systems replace the Electoral College. Data privacy is absolute, and the internet becomes a borderless nation where citizenship is granted by digital ID, not birthright. The physical world follows. California, or at least the Bay Area, could declare itself a technological republic, severing political ties with the US in everything but geography. Other innovation hubs like Austin, Seattle, and New York's tech corridors might join this new digital confederation, creating a patchwork of tech-first states. But would this new nation be a utopia or a plutocracy? In a society run by tech CEOs and engineers, who safeguards human rights, labor protections, or economic equity? Would this be the liberation of the digital age, or the creation of a new oligarchy where only the digitally connected have a voice? The rest of the world would react swiftly. US allies, fearing instability, might pressure Silicon Valley to rejoin the Union. America's enemies, meanwhile, would seek to exploit the chaos. And the United States itself would be faced with an existential dilemma: crush the breakaway or negotiate with it as a foreign power. Scenario 3. Reconciliation. A new social contract. But perhaps there is a better way. In this future, cooler heads prevail. After brinkmanship and near catastrophe, both sides recognize that their mutual destruction serves no one. Tech companies and the government sit down, perhaps reluctantly, and negotiate a new social contract for the digital age. Privacy advocates, government watchdogs, and tech leaders draft legislation that protects individual rights without crippling innovation. Encryption remains strong, but law enforcement develops smarter, targeted investigative tools. Antitrust laws are updated to foster competition without gutting the infrastructure of the modern internet. Tax loopholes close, but so do unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles that stifle progress. In this scenario, the American people win. They regain trust in both their government and their technology. Silicon Valley continues to lead the world in innovation, but with checks and balances that reflect the complexity of a connected planet. The United States retains its position as a global tech leader, not through dominance, but through cooperation and ethical leadership. This peaceful resolution wouldn't erase the tensions between profit and public good, but it would acknowledge them and create frameworks to manage them. It would mark the evolution of democracy itself in the digital age, global ramifications. In any scenario, the world would be watching. If the US fractures, whether through collapse or revolution, China and the EU are poised to reshape global tech standards. China's centralized model of surveillance capitalism and the EU's privacy-first digital regulations could split the internet into competing spheres of influence, leaving a once unified global web fragmented by ideology and power. America's decline as a tech leader wouldn't just hurt the US economy. It would shift the balance of global power for decades to come. But if reconciliation prevails, the US could model a new way forward, a balanced, ethical, human-centric approach to technology that bridges innovation and governance. The final question. So now we're left with the big question: who should technology serve? Should it serve the people, protecting their privacy and freedom above all else? Should it serve the government, ensuring law, order, and national security? Or should it serve the companies themselves, rewarding innovation and risk-taking without interference? Maybe it's not an either-or answer. Maybe it's all three. Or maybe it's none. But one thing is clear: the power of Silicon Valley and the power of Washington are on a collision course. And how we navigate that collision will shape the future not just of America, but of the entire digital world. So, is this a distant dystopia or a warning shot for what's already on the horizon? So, what do you think? If Silicon Valley and the US government really went to war, who would you trust to hold your future? The tech giants shaping our world, or the government sworn to protect it? Would this rebellion bring us freedom, or would it throw our lives into chaos? We want to hear your thoughts. What side would you take, and why? Drop your opinions in the comments below, start a conversation, and let's debate this future before it becomes reality. And if you found this video thought-provoking, please share it with your friends, your family, your coworkers, anyone who's ever wondered who really runs our world. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep questioning the world around you.